It is good to be back, everybody. My name's Tucker. Let's talk weather. Severe weather remains a headline. We'll talk about where the storms will be strongest and what to expect. And we can't forget about the heat, which is reaching dangerous levels across a good chunk of the country. It's great to see you all again. I've been gone for about 2 months, but the weather's active. We're getting into hurricane season. We're back to regular postings. In case you were curious, the last 2 months I've been enjoying summer, but had a few vacations, including a storm chase here. I saw some tornadoes in New Mexico and Texas. And then we had the family vacation. We'd go down to Georgia, played some golf, stuff like that. But more importantly, you're here for weather. We have some activity, like I said. I'm expecting storms, and you can kind of see a system out here already brewing. That's going to be moving to its east. And we have a lot of heat, especially across the southern U.S., but it's not just going to stay there. I see that moving much farther north as well. We're going to get into everything you need to be ready for right now. Wanted to start with a quick overview of the big picture here, and this is our jet stream. You can see it chugging along mainly into southern Canada, and out here farther south you have this area of calmer wind. Well, that's really a big hot air mass, and that's going to be expanding this week, and so we're going to watch that happen here as we put this in motion. Here's Thursday and Friday, and I'll also add some of these little extra pieces breaking off the main jet here. You kind of see them separate. Your main jet is really kind of going like this. Those are going to provide energy for some more potential severe weather, by the way. Just something to note as we watch this move forward. Moving into the weekend now. Again, you're seeing the jet mainly staying north. This is setting up for, again, this really hot air mass to develop across a good chunk of the U.S. And when the jet's riding north like this, sometimes you get these things called ridge riders. They're linear severe storms, when you get lines of storms. They may actually largely stay in Canada this week because it's going to be so hot, but it gives you an idea of the big picture. Although I will say, as we get into next week, you begin to see this ridge collapse a little bit here. We're looking at Monday, Tuesday, and that's where I do believe we may end up getting more severe weather here in the north central U.S., perhaps even northeast as well, as that hot air mass begins to close down a little bit, and it will be more active towards the middle of next week too. Now, before we get to the high heat, I wanted to show you some of the severe storm risk, and we're talking about Thursday here. That's a pretty broad threat. You got some storms that are going to be popping off the high terrain. That's going to bring some wind and hail. Also a chance for some wind and hail with some storms spreading out across the U.S. from Oklahoma into the Great Lakes region. Again, that's your Thursday here. As we move this into Friday, we see that threat extend into the northeast. We kind of talked about that with the jet, beginning to break off a little bit. That's going to be a wind threat out there, and also a wind and potentially even hail threat in the north central U.S. And it is the north central that's going to stay most active. And if we look at some of our machine learning forecasting, we can also see what is expected roughly on Saturday into Sunday and into Monday as well here. These days we are talking about, again, that ridge and potential ridge riders that are going to be bringing lines of storms and complexes through the north central U.S. So likely to stay pretty active out there. And I do believe we're going to see more severe weather on Tuesday as that ridge begins to collapse. Wednesday, a little more of a question mark. We have to see what happens with that ridge, but certainly activity is likely to remain. So at least some severe threat the next week, although I don't see a major threat any one of these days unless it ends up being Monday. If we can get some of those storms to really produce some damaging wind, you could get enhanced risk out of that. But we're still a ways out, something you want to check back as we watch. Hey, by the way, if you haven't subscribed, just consider doing so. I'm a meteorologist. I'll answer all your questions in the comments, and we'll be doing this regularly as we get into the all-important hurricane season. And now to our future cast, where you're going to see storms as we move this into Thursday, and you can see that line of storms, or cluster of storms, we'll say, from Oklahoma into Michigan. You got your storms popping off the high terrain out there. Moving this into Friday, I anticipate we see a line of storms in the northeast, and there it is, a broken line of storms at least, extending from Pennsylvania through Maine. A couple hints of some storms out here in the north central U.S., and as we move this into your Saturday, what we're going to be seeing are more or less daily storm chances in the north central U.S. into the Great Lakes region. Of course, you're also going to be seeing storm chances many of these days in the south, though those will be non-severe storms. But in the north central U.S. here, we'll move this into Sunday as well. You're going to see, again, a couple complexes that may potentially form. These complexes, it's hard to really forecast them in detail this far out. They're those setups that require a bit more data to refine. But nonetheless, there will at least be some potential, like I said, in this corridor, Sunday and Monday especially. And then as we head into next week, Tuesday, for example, that ridge begins to collapse. You're going to see a bit more activity here, especially you're seeing that in the northeast, and perhaps more of this activity dives a bit farther south as that occurs. No significant systems because we have the ridge in place. It's going to block any big storms out, but there will be activity, and we'll be watching that. Now we're talking heat, and it is going to be a hot week, but for many, not just a small portion of the country. And when we take a look at what we're looking at on this map, we're seeing how hot it is relative to normal, how hot the entire air mass is. And you are seeing some cooling out here in the afternoons. That's from storms. But as a whole, we're talking about heat across a huge chunk of the eastern U.S. especially. And for areas in the Great Lakes region, in the Northeast, in the Midwest even, it's going to be really hot compared to what we usually get this time of year. Texas, it's going to be hot too, but I know you guys deal with the heat a bit more. Especially as we get into the weekend, we're going to see that high heat. You can see in the north central U.S., those bright orange colors. It's going to be much hotter than normal in that part of the country in particular. But we're into Monday now next week, and even into Tuesday, you can tell this hot air mass is going to be here. But how does that translate to temperatures, and what are the highs going to be? Let's talk about that now. We're taking a look at the high temperatures now across the U.S. on Thursday, and you're looking at hundreds out here in Texas, and those are at least low to mid-90s that extend all the way into the Northeast, and of course you got your hundreds in the Southwest too. A lot of the U.S., like I said, is going to be hot starting on Thursday. And moving this into Friday, you have more heat. You got highs that are going to be potentially reaching the hundreds on the lee side of the Appalachian Mountains in the Carolinas. You got hundreds in Texas, and you got 90s into the Northeast. It's even a hint at 100 degrees in Connecticut, which, believe it or not, is possible. Some of the hills out there can make real hot, so we could have hundreds even into New England. On Saturday, you see high temperatures still in the hundreds in parts of the Carolinas, hundreds in Texas, hundreds in the Southwest. You got 90s well into the north central U.S. Not too abnormal, but it's going to be warm regardless. Heading into your Sunday, your temperatures, again, still very hot in the Carolinas and becoming hotter out here in the north central U.S. too. Those could be hundreds into places like even Oklahoma and Kansas. Now, as we kick this into Monday, you're still seeing heat. That's the thing. It's going to be very persistent this week. The Carolinas, basically the lee side of the Appalachian Mountains, going to be staying very hot. The Northeast does cool off a bit, by the way, but we're still talking, above average warmth out here. And you still got a widespread area of mid-90s or hotter. And even the West. I mean, I know it gets hot out there too, but you're talking 90s pretty deep into the northwestern U.S. So this is now into Tuesday next week, rather. Widespread hundreds still, and even Wednesday next week, we have a good chance for more widespread 90s and hundreds. So this is going to be a persistent heat, but what I'll also add is that you can now see that cooler air coming out of the north, and that cold front should continue to dive south as we get towards the middle days of next week. And to put a little more of this into context, we have our heat risk map from the National Weather Service. Once you get into those red and magenta colors, that tells you you're really looking at dangerous heat. So big time heat you can see here. This is for today, Wednesday, but on Thursday and Friday and Saturday, you're really seeing, again, a widespread area with those red colors. This is Sunday. You have some of those magenta colors showing up in the Carolinas. That's really where it becomes a big problem. You really have to take it seriously, everyone, not just at-risk populations. Then as we head into Monday and Tuesday, again, still seeing a lot of that magenta color. And I know in the Southeast, it's hot all the time, but this takes into account the climatology, the averages. So this is saying, even if you're used to heat, it's going to be a big deal. And that's, of course, what we're talking about as we head into next week. And you can tell things do become a bit more comfortable in the north as we get into, Tuesday and Wednesday, but still for a good chunk of the southern U.S. and East Coast, it's going to be toasty and, dangerously hot into the middle of next week as well. And that's going to do it for this video. Hopefully I wasn't too rusty coming back after a couple months, but it's good to be back. We'll be doing these regularly again going forward. I'll be adding in some educational videos because I know people have asked for that. But we're going to keep you up to date in hurricane season. And again, remember, in hurricane season, there's a lot of hype on the internet. Right here, you're going to get it as it is. Again, I'm a meteorologist, and I didn't get into this career just to hype things up. So information you can trust right here. I'll see you guys next time. Hopefully you stay cool out there and stay safe if there's storms where you are too.